I just wanted to show you these photos, which I took 1969 in Chennai. When I was 19, I went by train and bus through Afghanistan and Iran and Balochistan to India and enjoyed it very much. And I got programmed to have an interest in India, which I've been here at least 12 times since. And I made an exhibition of street life in Chennai at that time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Kim Michelson. And now we have a little bit of a problem because of the time constraint. We would love to have questions at this stage, but I think what we'll do is that we'll keep the questions for later. I just want to share that Professor Michelson is with us for 3 days, right?
I will be here all 3 days and I'll be happy to discuss any aspects.
Yeah, so because we have 2 more speakers before the lunch, before we break for lunch, I think for the time being, we'll keep the questions for a bit later and let's get on with the second presentation. Thank you very much, Professor.
Again, thank you, Professor Kim, for a very comprehensive presentation. I'm sure we are going to have more interactions with him. Our next speaker is a very eminent person in the field of nutrition, France Begin. She has a PhD in nutrition and has got more than 25 years of experience in international nutrition. She's a senior nutrition advisor for infant and young child nutrition at UNICEF headquarters in New York. And previously she was a regional nutrition advisor for Asia Pacific region for 5 years. Prior to joining UNICEF, she worked for the Micronutrient Initiative in Ottawa and in Africa office. She lived abroad in several countries including Chad, Guatemala, South Africa and Thailand. She has served on several technical advisory committees and is author and co-author of several publications. Thank you, friends, and we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, and I'm also very pleased to be here. It's a meeting we've been discussing and planning a long time ago, so I'm really happy that it's concretizing today. Sorry, it's okay. So we heard just before that how important, how big are the needs of the infants and young children. And I will just, in a few minutes, just go and give you an overview on the global infant and young child feeding practices, global and regional practices. So briefly talking about the continued breastfeeding, which is a key component of complementary feeding period. Some data on complementary feeding indicators at the regional level and some of the disparities we have in those indicators, the link with stunting, briefly on IYCF in emergency, as well as feeding practices during common illnesses. So this graph is to show the feeding practices at the global level. We see that there's much of improvement around exclusive breastfeeding that we have to do here. In terms of the complementary feeding indicators, the global estimate that are available for complementary feeding indicators are only timely introduction of semi-solid and solid and soft food, which shows that just like 2/3 of the children globally have timely introduction of that food. For the others, it's either too early or too late, that period. For South Asia, we have a bit of a similar pattern, but it's even lower. The timely introduction of complementary food is less than 60%. Just have a look here at this map just to show the breastfeeding at 1 year old. I said breastfeeding is really important. It's a key component of complementary feeding practices. And we see most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa and several of the countries in Asia have are still breastfed at 1 year old. But if you look at the next map, which shows like at 2 years old, there's a very big decrease. We have, in fact, the minority of children in the world are breastfed at 2 years old. A brief point on the core indicators. We have those indicators to assess infant and young child feeding practices. And the table here shows the core indicators for the complementary feeding period. I will be focusing on the ones that are food related, the one with the red arrow. And the minimum dietary diversity, whether the child is breastfed or not, is a minimum of 4 food groups per day, the previous day, that should have been eaten in order to be considered adequate. The minimum meal frequency will depend on the age of the child and whether the child is breastfed or not. And the minimum acceptable diet is, in fact, a combination of those 2 indicators. So this graph here shows the proportion of children 6 to 23 months old who are meeting the minimum acceptable diet, minimum dietary diversity, and meal frequency. So we see that for all the regions, the MAD, the minimum acceptable diet, is quite low. For South Asia in particular, we see that it means that basically 80% and more of the children do not have an adequate diet for optimal growth and brain development. And for the overall less developed countries, this is in fact 1 in 10 children who do not meet, 9 in 10 children who have an inadequate diet. The graph just before didn't include the data from India because the survey report is not yet available to be included in the regional estimates. So here is just to show that for India and Maharashtra, a similar pattern also is seen in terms of minimum dietary diversity and meal frequency, but it's even lower than the average that we have in South Asia. And not surprisingly, across also the country, in rural area, the diversity and the minimum frequency is also lower than in urban area. Now just a quick look at the disparities in between low-income and upper-income countries and within the same countries across well-household, well quintiles. So here we see that a graph that shows, the minimum, the percentage of children that met the minimum diet diversity. And what I want to point out here is that even young children that are coming from richer household in low-income countries, in fact, are getting a very low diet diversity. So it's even a problem, and I think this morning we heard this from the government that it's an issue that we have also in rich households, that the dietary diversity frequency also can be an issue. So it's not just the problem of poor households. I just want to show this slide to show that in fact what we want to have here is that we want for every child, that whether they are born in a poor family or in a rich family, that the whole silhouette becomes green, so that they meet their minimum acceptable diet, poor or rich. And we have this data for, of course, several of the countries, but you can see that in some countries like Nigeria and Liberia, to give an example, there's just very little children who meet the minimum acceptable diet. And in fact, many of them don't meet either the minimum diversity or minimum meal frequency. And again, whether they are poor or rich. So this is something that is important to take into account. We also heard this morning that the importance of the consumptions of animal food source, not only for growth, but also to help meet certain nutrients like iron and zinc. And here I just want to maybe bring just your attention on the fact that, there is, not surprisingly, lower number of proportion of children from the low-income countries who have access to animal products, whether we talk meat or dairy products or eggs. We know that income is an issue, education sometimes, or other cultural practices, which is important to understand behind. What I wanted to show specifically is around the upper middle income countries. It's interesting to see on the orange bar, this is a proportion of children who meet, in fact, who had at least one animal food in the previous day, which is relatively high. But you see that the minimum acceptable diet, the blue bar, is lower, which indicates that there may be also other food groups that can be the limiting factor. In this case, would be fruit and vegetables. So, which, although most of the time animal product is the main limiting factors in terms of diversity, we need to unpack this a little bit more. What we have under this minimum diversity, and sometimes it's the fruit and vegetables that not given in the diet of the child. Relationship between stunting and complement feeding, we know that it's not the only factor that can prevent stunting, but we know that appropriate complementary feeding has a key role in stunting. This slide is just to show from the Global Nutrition Report from 2014, the relationship between stunting and minimum dietary diversity, which overall show that where we have higher stunting, there is also lower minimum dietary diversity. This is just a regression line with no control of other factors, but it does show an association here in relation. So we did look at a few countries to see, to explore that link a little bit more. And what we see is that even when we control for income of the family, education, child's age, and access to water sanitation, we still see that there is children who are not consuming animal sources, food source, are more likely to be stunted. So we are currently doing analysis for other